So here we are chatting about frame today. And I think this is going to be an out of order effort to start going through some of the sidebar content. I know one of the users on RPC had commented recently that they wanted to see some kind of walk through progressively of the sidebar content. I've told people before on the sub, I kind of wrote the sidebar when I was gradually figuring things out for myself. I don't remember half the things that I wrote on there. And for the things that I do remember, I know that there are certain things that I would go back and say, if I did it again, I would be writing something a little bit differently. Not to say that it's all bad. There's definitely, in fact, I would say that I would still agree with probably 98% of the stuff that I've got on there. However, for the sake of the fact that some things will change, the order is one of those. And today we're going to talk about frame instead of starting right off the cuff with the 101. So what do you guys want to chat about on frame?
Well, I think to begin with, just emphasizing the importance of understanding it. And I think for me, when I approached the red pill, this is one of the concepts that unlocked the rest of it. It is kind of the cornerstone of the rest of the theory, that if you don't understand frame, the rest of the theories and things you're going to encounter in situations are really going to feel disjointed. And so I think that for those who feel like their concept of frame is either underdeveloped or you've never heard this before, this is really the time to tune in. And hopefully we can do a good job of detailing what this means and explaining it, because I think even if you were to go over to some of these secular red pill areas, you'd find a lot of the misunderstandings that people have tend to boil down to this particular issue of frame. So starting with, I'm just going to take our glossary sidebar definition. And yes, there is a glossary on the sidebar. Read it. Please just freaking read it before asking, what does this mean? So frame is the context in which something is perceived. A man's frame is his internal point of origin that defines how he perceives the world. If a man's perception of the world is determined by others' judgments, he is in their frame. If other people interact with the man on his terms, according to his perceptions, then they are operating within his frame. Maintaining frame is often cited as the most important aspect of alpha behavior.
Okay, so based on that, I feel like a lot of those, a newbie coming to RPC or the red pill, that seems like a complex definition of it. Can you dumb it down a little bit?
So I think the dumbed down version would revolve around the idea of an internal point of origin, right? That's really the most complex concept in that definition right there. And I know that's the one that Rollo tends to rely on a lot when he talks in terms of frame. Do you guys want to flesh out what an internal point of origin means?
So when I think about an internal point of origin, are your personal beliefs and your internal attitudes driving your behavior, or is your behavior being driven by something external to you, whether the felt need to please someone else or the desire to espouse a certain belief that you may not hold? And essentially just comes down to, is your behavior congruent and determined by your internal understanding of the worldview, if you will?
So what would you make in that context of somebody who believes that they are operating out of their own internal sense of desires and wants and philosophies and all of that, when in reality they've been so heavily shaped by external influences that their own internal point of origin has molded to those external sources?
Well, I think part of taking the red pill is understanding that it's okay to want what you want. There's a reason for it, and that the desires of the world that are put out there, whether in Hollywood or Disney or wherever you may find them, that they aren't necessarily inherently what people desire or should want. And so I think part of taking the red pill is understanding that you have to re-examine priorities and re-examine what it is that you're aiming after and what you believe about the world. And so when you can open up that, you are then searching ultimately for another source of authority other than the world, which as a Christian we should say is the scriptures, is the Bible, is God. And I think that all flows out from there. Now, to make it really, I guess, succinct, as far as what is frame and how do you kind of boil it down, I would say if you are in the, I guess, driver's seat of an interaction, you are probably operating within your own frame and they are probably operating within your frame. If you are reacting in a situation, you are probably operating in their frame. This is not always, but I would say that as a general rule, this is the case.
So what would you make of all the comments that exist on MRP, for example, about how your frame is you at your best self? I've heard people like Ryan Stone, and I believe Weak and Sensitive has made that comment before, a handful of other mods.
So this might be parsing it a little too finely, but I think that there are some real idiots who have great frame and they're not their best self at that time. But I've seen people who are really high, really drunk, or otherwise just not in their high quality state of mind, who are operating with impeccable frame and that they are doing everything from their own internal point of origin. It's just that internal point of origin is way out of sorts and not what we would necessarily consider helpful or healthy in terms of social interaction. You're kind of a poor example in some ways, but something that's very relevant to my life right now. My 8-month-old son has awesome frame. Like, he does not have a mental point of origin outside of himself. He has no concept of what other people's wants or desires are. It is totally a self-actuating frame where he's looking to do what he wants to do without any regard for other people's opinions. Now, I don't think any of us would say that he is his best self at 8 months old, and what his wants and desires are representing that. And so I think that frame can be, I mean, ideally frame would be you at your best self, but that's not always the case.
So one thing I've done with some of my buddies, I just wanted to tag on. I did a little men's group with some close friends, guys, and I just wrote up a little sheet of like developing frame. And the question I asked them was, who do you want to be like on your best day? Like, do you want to be a generally angry person? Do you want to be a happy-go-lucky person? Like some descriptive, gosh, I'm not good with English class. Some descriptive words, I guess, of who they want to be, and then setting that as the goal. And anytime they operate outside that or break that, for example, if they don't want to swear, right? Like, I don't want to be a person that swears. I'm just using it as an example. And then I swear, I'm breaking my own frame. And obviously, as a Christian, you should have God at the core of that, and it should be coming out through every part of what you want to have as your frame.
Yeah, and we'll get to that later. Part of the reason I asked the question the way I did is because it's easy for this conversation to always be mumbled together into one particular concept of frame, when in reality, oftentimes what we need to distinguish out is, are we talking about the strength of a man's frame or the quality of a man's frame, right? Because there is value in having a strength of frame, even independent of the quality, right? And so I tell some guys, you know, if you want to have a strong frame, and we see these people all the time on Reddit, these are the total jerks who just want to go around and bully everybody and say, haha, you're stupid, and move on, right? And that's fine. And there is value in having that type of strong frame because it does earn some kind of respect, influence, even if only through fear. But at some point, if you want to have other people follow you in your frame, you have to have a quality of frame that makes them desire to live inside, right? And so if you have a frame with titanium walls, barbed wire surrounding it, and you've got turrets and everything that's blocking your borders so that nobody could possibly break this frame, who's going to want to live in that too, right? So at some point, you have to have couches and a recliner, and you have to have lovely music playing, and to be able to have that softness that's going to invite people in and say, yes, this is a stronghold, but at the same time, there's value in you being here. This is a place you want to get inside. You don't want to be on the other end, right?
Yeah, I think that the idea of worldview comes up a lot in Christian circles, especially conservative Christian circles. And I think that is, at least in part, what Christians will use instead of the word frame. It's how do you look at all the things going on around you and how do you interpret them? And ultimately, the conclusions that you arrive at are kind of going to determine what your frame is. So what Levi was talking about, as far as if you want your behaviors to match a certain thing, it's because you believe something is true about that. It's a superior way of being, for example, not to swear. If that's your conviction, if that's your worldview, then when you are operating according to that and that means you're operating according to your frame. If you break that, then you're being incongruent, and incongruency is really the breakdown of frame. And so people recognize when people are being congruent with themselves, whatever that may be. And so I think that is a very important part about developing strong frame, is developing a very cohesive worldview, or at least one that you can understand yourself and defend others. So that's one area that I would advise if you're unsure of what your frame is in terms of what it should be. If you have a strong frame or a quality frame, start making statements and very carefully examine some of the things going on around you and where do you stand. And we very quickly see women who react to guys with weak frame. They don't stand on anything, and that's repulsive to women because they have no frame. And so stand for something, even if it's the wrong thing at first, and you learn later that it's different. You can change your opinions, you can change your frame, but it has to come from your own decision making, not because, oh, it'll make Sally really happy if I start believing these things about the world. That's operating 100% within her frame.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys probably have encountered this way more than I have, but what are some typical like stumbling blocks or confusions that new guys have when, say, they're in a relationship and they have crap frame and they're confused on frame and they try to develop frame and they end up coming up with all these problems, and they come back and say, hey, I messed up, or like, I don't understand. What are some of those things that you guys have seen?
The first thing I would say is a guy needs to learn how to, one, have his own strength of frame before you start attacking somebody else's frame. So this is where guys go Rambo, right? They think that having a strong frame means that you go out there and make other people feel horrible just to prove that you're strong, right? It's not how it works. And so they will start getting into conversations with their wives, and during an argument, they will just make her feel like total crap. And they think, well, that was proving my strong frame because I showed that my emotional state was more powerful than hers. But in reality, that's a battle of frames. That's not strengthening your own frame. And so what I would want guys to first realize is you got to develop your own strength of frame, not by engaging in that type of discourse, but by maintaining your own internal peace, right? And so this is what we call the like stoicism, or just generally the ability to withstand pain or to avoid being butthurt. And this is something that I failed at for a long time. Anytime I had ever been sexually denied, or anytime that my wife would make any type of complaint about me, I would get, instead of the angry person, a lot of people really lash out with, yelling and throwing things and all kinds. I was the robotic type of cold, just completely shut down. And it was a passive aggressive weapon for me. And in reality, that was showing just as much break of frame as the anger method did. And so what I had to do at some point was to realize, look, why is it that I can't have something bad happen to me and still be in a good mood? That should be common sense and basic and easy. Why do I have to let other things affect my disposition in life? And so at some point I started realizing, okay, so something crappy happens, I can smile through it and continue to be happy. Your emotions are a choice. A lot of people think that your emotions are dictated by all kinds of hormones and chemicals and your circumstances. No, you can pick to be happy if you want to be. And so my dad always taught me that growing up. Anytime I would throw a hissy fit around the house, John, you can be happy if you want to be. You can control your emotions. If you want to have a good day, you have a good day. It doesn't matter how many bad things happen to you. You decide how your day is going to go. And it never really sunk in until I started studying the art of frame and what that actually meant. And then I realized, oh goodness, you're right. It doesn't matter how troublesome things are going with my kids and my marriage, etc. And so then I actually hit this opposite point where if I wanted to, for example, I show sternness and seriousness to my kids when I'm trying to discipline them, because I don't really get upset by stuff like that directly anymore, at least not often. It does still happen. But sometimes I have to pretend to be angrier than I actually am in order to get them to realize that I'm trying to say something serious. And so it's just funny how that works out. But that's probably one of the, I guess to summarize the point, one of the main things I'm trying to say there is that you want to make sure that first you are learning to maintain your own frame in and of yourself, that you can deal with painful things that come your way and still be able to have that positive, uplifting attitude that shows you at your best, regardless of what comes your way. That's where it's got to start.
That on that note, and that we have like 13 minutes left, how do you develop a rock solid frame? I feel like for a single guy, it's a little bit more difficult. Just there's not as much opportunities, I guess, in certain senses. How did you guys go about developing your frame? And yeah.
So what I would say is I tend to have a very concrete outlook about things, and that's developed over time. But what I think about in terms of developing a strong frame is asking the question, if everything else went to hell in my life, what would I still believe to be true? What would I still do on a day-to-day basis, even if everything else went wrong? And those convictions, those things that are left over, those are going to be the core of your frame. And then it doesn't matter what Sally says or what, your boss says, or whoever in your life does something, because it doesn't matter, because it's not the worst thing that can happen to you. And even if it was, you would still believe and do the things that you're convicted about. And so if you have that strong internal core of conviction, the rest of it pretty much comes into line otherwise. And so I think it's developing, what are my non-negotiables? What are the things that come hell or high water, I'm going to continue to believe unless I can be persuaded by insurmountable evidence that I need to modify those things. And so, those type of things are going to be very operative, I think, on your mental state when dealing with other people, and people pick up on that really quickly and begin to be very interested in that, because as you interact with people around the world, most people don't have a strong sense of objective truth, if you will. People are very wishy-washy, and it's off-putting in a lot of ways, and it's a weak frame when people are not convicted of their own beliefs. So I would say make determinations based on the evidence or the facts that have been presented for you, be willing to modify them based on the evidence that you come across, but hold on to them firmly and develop those things, and that will come together. And this should be in a lot of areas of life. And I think the more areas you can develop strong convictions, the stronger your frame will be, whether that's sexual dynamics, whether that's politics, religion. All of these areas are big and they're weighty, and they're like a web, they touch each other. And so if you can make those very concrete in your own mind, the rest of it will flow naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about you, John?
So I guess before going too much on that, the thing that crosses my mind that probably needs to be said on this is, just as I said, the first place to start is probably strengthening your frame. I would say the second thing a guy needs to do is to make his frame something warm, inviting, and that would cause other people to want to join in with what you're doing, right? And only after that do you get to the point of actually butting heads with other people's frame. And so I think if you hit that order in specific, that really helps the most. One, learn to be content and fully self-aware in how you're going to approach your own life before you start going off any further. After that, once you learn to be able to maintain that inner peace and strength yourself, then you take the next level of saying, okay, now I'm going to find ways to become a better person so that other people want to join in. And after that, then you say, okay, now I am going to invite you to join in. And oh goodness, now you realize other people have their own frames too. Who knew, right? And so as you try to get somebody else to join in, then you're pulling them in, but their frame is also strong to some degree. Who knows? And it's going to vary from person to person. But if you try to pull them in, they don't want to come in, then you're fighting against the strength of their frame. And now you have to decide, am I going to be in this offensive, or am I going to wait for them to come voluntarily, or how's that going to work, right? But you have to have something that makes them want to leave their own framework of operating within the world in order to join you. And so that's why you have to, after strengthening your own frame, work on actually improving the quality of your frame after that.
So basically, strengthening your frame and then working on is, I guess, evaluating. For me, when you said those, I think of like evaluating my frame. Like I have this strengthened frame. Now I'm going to evaluate, is this a frame that other people would want to join, like a future wife, or obviously disciples in the king, and you disciple your wife too. That's kind of what you're saying, right?
Kind of. So here's the question that immediately pops out, and I'm sure that this came out with how I worded it too, but listening to you repeat back to me what I think you heard me saying. having a type of frame that other people would want, right? That obviously is not your own frame at that point. So how would you reconcile that?
So I'm going to just pitch in here and say, I'm just not interested in people who aren't interested in my frame when it comes to relationships of this like romantic nature. When I met my wife, if she was not interested in what I was interested in the world, I just didn't care. Like, she would have been a nice person that I met, but I would have moved on. And so I was not interested in trying to convince her that my frame was worth following, because I was busy doing my own thing. And if she saw the value in that, then she was smart enough to see the value in that, and I was interested.
So how does that help the countless guys who show up on RPC who have already been married and didn't have the benefit of thinking that way before they were married?
I think it's time to become very convinced of what it is that you believe about the world. And it's going to be a slog, but as you act congruently with that, it's going to raise questions, and you better be ready to, I would say, not in like a deering sort of way, defensive, explaining, rationalizing, etc., but in a, winsome way, be willing to and ready to explain what it is that you're doing. Because at the end of the day, you do want your wife to understand and to come along with you. And I think that as you do that, and as she tests your frame, we had a talk on tests a while ago, and as she tests your frame, that's exactly what she's doing. When she gives you those tests, she's saying, do you actually believe and do the things you say you believe and do? And so those are a welcome thing in a lot of ways, because it's a way to see for yourself, is my frame, am I operating congruently with my own beliefs? And
so what I'm hearing out of this,
go ahead.
Sorry, your volume cut out for a second, so I thought you were done.
No, it's all right.
What I'm hearing out of this, I guess, is that you were suggesting, okay, well, it's better if you can find somebody who already shares a lot of your values and is on board, so that way you don't have to go through a lot of the hard work of getting them on board. Makes sense. Completely agree with that. Looking at the reverse, though, I tend to be a very firm believer in the idea that you can pull virtually anybody into any frame you want to create and be successful at that. You are an attractive, charismatic enough person. And the reason that I say that is, one, every internet conversation is going to go into Nazism at some point, right? And so do we really, these people out there in Germany just spontaneously, unanimously decided, oh yes, we need to go off and kill all these Jewish people, right? They're probably not. And I guess my connection's unstable.
That's okay. You're officially disqualified from the internet for using the Nazi analogies. So, so take
anyway, the point is to say that
I get what you're saying.
Yeah. So Hitler was not allowed, he was not out there looking for people who already wanted to go kill all the Jews and hold to Nazi ideals. He was instead just a very charismatic leader who caused people to want to believe what he believed, even if that's not what they believed at first, right? And in the same way, I think, and I used to do this when I was in college. I remember with certain people, just to see, or in high school rather, in high school, just to see how persuasive I could be in an argument, I used to try to convince people to, at the end of the conversation, that I'm opposed to Nazis, obviously. But the idea was I was trying to see how persuasive I could be to other people. And it was interesting to see how easy it was to get people to sympathize with something that at the beginning they would say that they hated and despised. Right? And so it's always possible to be able to turn somebody around, and even if they don't share your convictions, you can pull them into your frame if you are an attractive enough person that makes them want to live there and be
there. Yes, on the whole, I agree that you can drag people into your frame. The difference, I guess, is you can build a house on just about any piece of land, but you might have to expend to build on certain parcels of land compared to others. So if you're still in the process of selecting land, you better have a pretty good idea of what you're trying to build before you get the land, if I'm using a poor analogy here. So for the person who is already married, who has the piece of land and that is not suitable, you're a lot more work to make that happen. So that's okay. Just be aware of it.
Okay. We have 3 minutes left. There was 3 things I want to mention that I think are really important for developing frame and this one seems really obvious, we haven't touched yet, is lifting regularly, getting in shape. That helped me massively. I don't know if that helped you guys massively, but the more physically fit I looked, the more respect people gave me. And so that was really easy. Another one is just failing.
Hold on, Levi. Hold on.
Okay.
Before you go too much further.
Okay.
I'm going to cut you off, and we're going to continue our talk on frame in the next episode, and we're going to let that be a cliffhanger for everybody to want to come back and hear the next time, okay? And I think that would be a fantastic way to start our next episode. All right, it's been a good time, guys.
Later, guys.